And we are live. So, hello, Martial Arts Journey Tribe. As always, hello not only from me, but Bolsa, 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 Bolsa. There you go. He's a bit silent today. So, from me and my companion, as always. So, today we are going to have a fascinating guest and one that I've been meaning to talk to for a long time. It's William Bull, a representative of Shodokan Aikido, which a lot of people know simply as Tomiki Aikido because of the founder, whose name was Tomiki. That's as much as I know. It's but what's really interesting is that it's one of the only major styles that, again, as least as far as I'm aware, that it's an Aikido style that has the element of competition. And William is not only an instructor of Tomiki Aikido, but he's also an experienced competitor himself. Although we spoke a little bit off record, there's some things to comment there, that it's not all about competition, but we'll get to that in the discussion. But I just wanted to put it out there that he has direct experience in it. I hunted down some bio, and it says that William and Will, in the short version, is the current United States champion in Toshu open hand combat and Randori knife skills. He also was on the United States team that took fourth place in the 2015 worldwide competition in Brisbane, Australia. And from what I gather, for Will, it's not the important point, but I just wanted to let everyone know that, again, he has experience. So we will talk about competition a bit. I'm so curious to know about it because part of my plan is to try Tomiki Aikido myself. Unfortunately, it does not exist in my country. I never bumped into it. So it's still high on my priority list, but I always wanted to talk with someone who has a lot of experience in it. So I'm super happy that finally I'll get to talk to that person. So I'll ask some questions about the competition element of Aikido, how it works, because it's just a lot of people are seeing videos online, but sometimes it's difficult to make out what's where, how does it work, and finally we'll have a chance to talk about it. And we will also be discussing about the self-defense aspect of Tomiki Aikido and a phrase that Will likes to say, which is, if you like to fight, Aikido is not for you. If you want to be able to defend yourself, then Aikido is what you're looking for. It sounds like a really great quote. I'll be interested to ask you more about that. And also, as always, stay tuned through the whole talk, as on the second half, will be open to answer your live questions written through the chat. So hold your questions until that part, and then we'll do our best to answer as many as we'll have enough time for. So with the introduction having been said, as always, I invite you to grab your preferred beverage, and let's invite Will, and let's get this journey started. So hello again, Will. It's
Hello.
good to see you.
Yeah.
I said it off record, but again, thank you so much for being open to do this. I'm again said it a bit on off record as well, but I have not always a positive reputation online. Some people love what I do, some people dislike what I do, lightly said. So, but I really appreciate when people are open to give me a chance and talk to me and just discuss about martial arts and everything. So again, I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
So, quick question: just how are you doing today? Is everything going well for you?
Yeah, everything is going great. It's been a pretty good morning. Got up, did my normal workout, and now I'm sitting down talking to you before I head off to teach a couple classes. So, good morning so far.
Great. So one of the main first questions that I like to ask my guests is, and you can take it anywhere you want. As the question is, basically how you would describe a brief version of your martial arts journey. So it can be as brief or as long as you feel like it. So let's say like a brief version of your martial arts journey.
Um, okay. Currently, I'm the Chief Technical Director of Tomiki Aikido of the Americas. It's a new title I was just given, and I thank people for that. I currently hold a fifth degree black belt in Tomiki Aikido. I originally started studying with Frank Ferris. He taught out of South Baltimore. To any and everyone that would wanted to come into a dojo for about $4 a class. He's known famous throughout Baltimore for that. All of my certifications were done by Dr. Yoji Kondo, Shihan Yoji Kondo. He was one of the original people sent to the U.S. to teach Aikido by Kenji Tomiki, him and along with Carl Grice, I believe. I've also studied a lot of other martial arts. I've done, your karate, your kempo, your shorin-ryu, your judo, your jiu-jitsu, a little bit of Wing Chun. And in Baltimore, there's an art called Shokujitsu, which was more of a, I guess way back then you would call it an MMA type style art where everybody just did anything and tried to survive, which was really great and taught me a lot about martial understanding as well.
Hmm. So that's something I picked up in your bio as well. And I don't know, did you have was it someone else that written that bio, or do you know which bio I'm talking about? Like, is that a correct bio?
I've written a couple. I don't know which one you're referring to, but I usually write them myself and then I give them to my daughter-in-law or somebody like that to have them edited to make sure it's saying the message that I'm trying to portray. So, but yeah, I usually write them myself.
Mm. So what was interesting for me, it was written in that bio that you start off with more offensive martial arts, which sounds like, from you mentioned, like it was more kind of active. I wouldn't necessarily say aggressive, but I see, like, I can picture what you mean by offensive. Like more.
Yeah, like more punching, kicking.
Right.
When you're young, you start off with that understanding that fighting is fighting. So you want to learn how to punch and how to kick and dominate a situation. So that's what I started off in my youth.
Nice. And eventually you turn into to Aikido. So what made that transition? Like, what drew you to Aikido, that you left all that behind and you moved on?
It's a long story, but let's just say that I found myself in a situation where being totally offensive was great, but I was quickly overwhelmed where there was more attackers than I could deal with. So I put down a couple of people, and while standing around, because in competition, you gloat and you talk about your wins. Things didn't work out well, and I spent a little bit of time in shock trauma, some organ damage, that kind of thing. So after a stint in the hospital and a year of recovery, I came out looking for a better understanding of martial art and martial understanding. And that's how I got into Aikido, because it was more about not dealing with the situation, but knowing how to understand the situation before it even arises.
Yeah, I like that a lot already. So that's an interesting point about multiple attackers, and I think it's a fair criticism towards combat sports, that it's like, so I'll expand here a tiny bit, but boxing, everybody knows boxing is boxing. You get into the ring, you do some striking. Like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you go on the ground, you grapple, you do some takedowns. And so in a way, like, people don't expect more from it. Like if somebody would come to a boxing gym and say, "Oh, why are you guys not kicking?" People would say, like, "Well, we're doing boxing." But at the same time, some people, I think, confuse it, and they're like, they imagine, okay, I'm gonna learn, let's say, MMA, and I'm going to become this unbeatable fighter. But then they're learning to deal with a single person at a single time with a certain rule set, and that multiple attacker scenarios is really never covered. And I think, like, Aikido, in the general sense of it, like, that's one of the major parts of it is multiple attackers. So was that part of your martial arts journey as well, kind of asking yourself that question and finding it in Aikido?
Yes, it's kind of funny because I was originally looking for something that was a little softer on the body, looking for the soft side of the art. And a guy I was working with at the time, I was taking Wing Chun then, and he says, "Hey, you got to come and see this Aikido stuff." So I go and I see the class, and it looks as boring as it does online. I mean, it looks like, these guys are practicing throwing each other around, and I don't really understand it. But at the time, Frank Ferris, the great guy he is, recognized, my misunderstanding, and he says, "I need you to hang out for a little while, because after class they're going to do something, that they only the upper belts do, and to give you a better understanding of what Aikido is." And they were doing multiple attack, and I saw this one little small guy. He's probably about 5'2" or something like that, which he was a Marine then. I didn't know it at the time, but he was just walking through these guys that were twice his size, twice his weight. And me, I've always been one that could recognize danger in a technique. It's a long story, but when I was young, like 5, 6 years old, my parents were watching and my grandfather were watching professional wrestling. And I was like, "Hey, those guys are friends." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, he's trying to cup his head as he throws him to the ground. If he really wanted to hurt him, he would just drive his face into the ground." And that started a whole fight with my family. And, because back then wrestling was
Right. Yeah.
So, but I could see that when he was doing arm bars and I could see like he was trying his best not to hurt the other person. And I was hooked from there because I could see that the potential in the techniques that he were doing, and I could understand that he was being gentle because that was his choice, and he was trying not to do damage. And from there, I was stuck on Aikido, and I knew it was where I wanted to be.
So I'm interested to ask, that demonstration that you saw, was it the kind of, in a way, and I don't know a better word to use than competition. So, but was it like more that competitive style where people were really trying to get him, or was it more like a general type of Randori?
No. It was in Baltimore. Most of Baltimore isn't like competitive fighters. They're more looking for spiritual understanding, make sure their techniques are practical and you can apply them in real world scenarios. So it was not about the competition of it. By the way, in the end, he got overwhelmed and they pinned him down because that's it's a time thing. But it was legit. They were trying to take him down. With grab. They weren't punching and kicking, but they were all trying to grab him and subdue him. And he had to use his Aikido to not allow that to happen, and not hurt them at the same time, which I think is the harder goal in true Aikido.
Yeah, I think that's like really the noble and at the same time difficult goal of Aikido. Is taking somebody down is already like difficult, but then the goal to not hurt the other person, that's like level 10. It's like the next world. So, but it's a great goal, and I'm also curious to ask, was Tomiki Aikido the very first style you bumped into, or did you also bump into other styles beforehand?
As far as Aikido?
Yeah.
I've also studied Aikikai. In Baltimore, there was the Frank Ferris School, which was in the south side of Baltimore. And then literally a block away, there was an Aikikai school. So for about 2 years, I would do both, but I would only do Aikikai, the weapons classes. So all of my weapon training came from Aikikai. But I knew the guys over there, and they were just as fierce as any other fighters you would see. They were just, more your professional guys and had softer personalities, and fighting wasn't part of them. It was more about understanding self and learning to control yourself as well as others if need be.
And what would you say kept you training? Because you started off with different martial arts, you went through them, and eventually it sounds like you chose Aikido and that became your martial art. So what kept you in Aikido for all these years?
It's a couple of things. Number one was Frank Ferris. Frank's way of teaching is he taught everybody the basics. Like you had to learn to walk, which is the footwork exercise in Tomiki Aikido. It's something we practice every class. And then you learn the basic techniques and you learn how to roll and how to fall. And once you learned that kind of stuff, it was a rite of passage, which we all made fun of in the dojo. It was called Uke of the Month. With him teaching 4-hour classes, there were always new people. Every class, there was 5, 6, 8 new people. And somebody had to take these ukemi for these new people. And once you got to the area of around Blue Belt, you were that person for a period of 30 or 60 days where you just took falls and more falls and rolls, and you taught the beginners the stuff that you already learned, like the first 5 techniques. And just by repetitively doing that same motions and teaching that same information, you gained a better understanding of the basics of Aikido. So whenever I was started out, it was just constantly teaching those new people, and every so often you would get a new nugget or a new piece of information, and you'd be like, "Hey, that's something that I need to work on personally," and then you would develop your Aikido to be better just by teaching others. Once I got away from teaching with Frank and I started teaching in my own school, it actually became the competitions that got me and kept me going, because you don't just go to a competition, you have to train for it. So you would train your katas and make sure your techniques are sound, and you'd be practicing and working out. So it was building up to the competition, going to the competition, enjoying the competition, having fun at the after parties and all that kind of stuff. And then the next year it would just cycle over again. All of my vacations over the last 20 years have kind of been revolving around Aikido competitions, because that's when all of, there's a couple hundred people of your friends from all over the world, you get together and you have a big party. I mean, that was great. That was something to look forward to every year.
Yeah, we slightly discussed that before going on record, but I really like that perspective that you shared, and I want to kind of include everyone who's listening to it as well. So you mentioned that you don't see the competition as I go there to win the medal and whether I live or die, but it's more an experience of testing your techniques and just kind of getting to get to know more people. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I am not really a competitive kind of fighter. It's just not what I look for. But when you get to a certain level, you start developing a internal Aikido where your techniques are your own, and you would practice them in your dojo, and you know practice them on other people. But they came to a point where they recognized what you were doing. So competition for us in Baltimore was about taking those techniques and practicing them on people that didn't understand the setups or didn't know what was coming. So we were just using it as our test ground or our practice ground for our own techniques. Now, there are people out there that take competition seriously, like this is it and this is that. But what I find is when competition is your goal and winning is your goal, you tend to see the rules as an obstacle, and then people look for ways to circumvent the rules so that they can win. For me, Aikido is not about winning; it's about making it home at the end of the day. That's winning for me every day. So that's why we go to competitions. It's all about just the atmosphere and being around people of like knowledge and exchanging information, and then testing out your techniques. So, be like, hey, well, that worked well, or well, that was a really bad idea. I need to scrap that one and start something new. So it's just about self development, learning your mistakes and learning how to improve them.
Right. Again, I like that a lot, and it also reminds me of a bit of an obstacle that I believe, from what I hear, that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I think it's a really popular martial art, really growing in the whole world these days. But there's some criticism towards it that a lot of people get attached and focused on the competition, and the competition, like as you said, the rules become the most important thing, and it's all about like how do I make sure I win the points, and I think one of the kind of key figures in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Rickson Gracie, I believe I'll be correct in sharing his thoughts that he expresses, that he's concerned about that because for him it was always about the self-defense aspect. It's like the martial arts should teach you to be safe, and he's concerned that people are so attached to the rules that they start to forget the real essence of why we start martial arts to begin with. So from your nod, from your nodding of your head, it sounds like you relate with that. It seems like it's
I totally relate. And the funny thing is, Tomiki himself also had that exact same thing. He wrote a letter way back when, I can't remember the article, but literally stating the same thing, that he started to recognize that people were practicing for the rules so that they could win instead of looking for the true Buddha of the art. For me, and I tell my students that is an internal fight. That's not something that someone else can fight for you. That's something you have to look internally and try to figure out why is it so important for you to win at this thing? I mean, why is that such a high ranking goal for you? And if it's high ranking goal for you, then that's good for you. But that's not why I practice.
Right. There's one more question related to your own personal experience of martial arts, and again, one of those I mentioned off record. It was really like kind of a funny moment for me. But the way I wrote down that question story is, I finished watching The Wire. I'm a bit lagging behind. It's not a new show, but what it portrayed to me was that Baltimore is a rough city, and for me, I grew up in a rough city myself. I mean, I was exposed to violence, different type from what the show shows, because Europe is a different setting, I guess. But again, but that exposition to violence, it shaped the way I would perceive martial arts. And unlucky for me, I didn't have that compass that you had with watching wrestling, the entertaining side of it, and you picked it up. You're like, okay, this is wrong. For me, I couldn't distinguish what's right, what's wrong, but I was searching, because I was exposed to violence. I was searching for answers, and it took me a long time to find those answers. But I think it's kind of different for people who get exposed to violence, how they perceive martial arts, versus people who are just like, there's some European countries where people never get into a fight through their whole life. People never see a fight in their whole life. Like I heard like stories about Spain that it's like that. And a friend of mine who was training in Spain, he was training Aikido, he was telling me that the locals, they wouldn't even ask the question of, oh, so would this work in the street? They wouldn't be concerned about that, because that's like not on their radar. So it's a kind of a long-winded question. But first of all, I was very curious to ask, and you kind of already settled that curiosity for me. But since I mentioned The Wire, how realistically is the city portrayed? Is it like, because as I said, like I watched The Wire and I was like, okay, I would be afraid to go to Baltimore, but I imagine it's not that bad. So how is
Um,
it?
well, the easiest way to put it is The Wire is a TV show, and it's embellished to promote the sale of that show. Um, uh, at that time when they were filming all this, I worked in Baltimore, and I met a couple of the actors, and I knew a couple of the actual people that the actors portrayed.
Mm,
And yes, there were aspects of Baltimore that represented that, but that was nowhere near the normal in Baltimore. The way I describe it to people, because I travel all over the world, and I've been asked this question before, it's is Baltimore can be a rough city if you don't learn to recognize, what's going on around you. And I live out in the woods, and I sit on the porch. And if I'm sitting out there and I notice that the wind picks up and there's a dark cloud rolling in and the leaves start turning up, well, I recognize that might be there's some rain coming. So
mm,
you might want to prepare for that. So, you either grab your umbrella or go in the house, or don't take your bike out that day, drive a different car or something like that. And that's just like any city. Like if you're walking down the street and there's, a guy staring at you, you might want to not go down there, or, have a better understanding of why is he staring at me. If you're
mm,
living on your block and there's people on your block that you don't regularly see and you don't understand why, you just want to make sure that you yourself are in a situation where you can keep yourself safe. Most of Baltimore is generally a safe area. There's groups of people that have issues with other groups of people, and as long as
mm,
you're not, within their avenue of problems, you're generally safe in Baltimore. But it's just like any Aikido. This is another reason. In the past, when I was an offensive fighter, I didn't recognize certain scenarios, and I found myself walking in a scenario, and I was in the midst of a situation I did not understand. As
mm,
if I knew Aikido back then, I think I would have recognized the situation well in advance and would have never even portrayed or put myself in that kind of scenario. So it's
mm.
it's it's basically the more you understand who you are and what you want to be, and then it's easier to avoid bad situations in any bad city.
Right. Yeah. Again, I like it. I like a lot what you're saying, and it reminds me of a conversation I had some years ago. There's this man named Bruno Roscoe. He's a well-known figure in the kind of Mexican area of Mexico area of the world. But he's an Aikido black belt, but also a very high level self-defense expert. Like he has this whole
Mhm.
self-defense system, and he educates people and prepares. And he talks a lot about that aspect of that it's more important to be aware and to know where to go and where not to go. And one of the stories I like that he said specifically with Mexico is that if you get in trouble with the wrong people, no amount of martial arts training is going to help you. Like
Exactly.
if somebody stops you with like an AK-47, like five guys, it's like Bruce Lee stuff is not going to help you. So it's the question is like, how do you not get there? And he also said, like when I was asking him about Aikido, like, so where do you see Aikido being valuable? And he said just the whole spirit of Aikido being kind of developing that mindset, positive mindset, gets you to spend time with positive people, with the right people, being at the right places, and not getting yourself into trouble, which is probably where a lot of the danger comes from. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I like that perspective a lot. And also too, just one more thought I'll share before another question. There's a video of an MMA fighter, like an infamous video, was posted quite a while ago now, but he gets into a verbal fight with someone in a gas station. Then they start to push each other. They go outside. He starts to fight one of them. A friend of his comes, hits him on the head. End of the
Mhm.
story. And so there's, I think, a lot of people pick up the part that, oh, he's an MMA fighter. He was fighting one-on-one person, and that was his mistake. But I think it's important to take a step back and to realize, well, if he wouldn't have gotten into that fight, he wouldn't got hit in the head, and like that's the real issue. That's the problem. And I guess a lot of the MMA fighters I met, they're really nice people, but I think, like from what you said, I think it's a bit there. Like if I see myself, if I would have done just combative sports,
Mhm.
then I would be in that state of, okay, if somebody's looking at me the wrong way, I'll go get into a fight. But maybe he has five friends, you know. And I
Right.
think right, and I think Aikido doesn't develop that mindset, and I think that can be a great part. So I presume you agree. with that.
100% agree. And I tell all my students that because, a lot of my students live in the Baltimore area, and I tell them, just be aware of your surroundings. If the first thing to avoid a fight is number one goal. It's like, people fight for dumb reasons, and don't be dumb. Like, avoid it. If they want something from you, find out if you can just give it to them. The true goal in Aikido is to make it home every day.
Right. I guess, interestingly enough, I think that should be the goal of every martial art, but I think just people sometimes take it in the wrong way. Like there's the, and I may be corrected by some karateka, but I think like there's this floating idea that the goal of karate is like one strike, one kill. like it's like why would you want to kill someone to begin with? Like what goal is that? It's just going to get you into trouble. So yeah, I think that goal makes more sense. And also to make it into a question, you just mentioned speaking to your students about awareness, and is that part of what you do as well as an Aikido instructor? Do you talk with your students about that pre-fight element, the seeing trouble, de-escalating situations? So how does that work?
100%. 100%. Like literally just last week, I had a very new student, and he comes to me and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to Vegas for the weekend." And one of my first comments to him was, well, just make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. Don't keep your wallet in your baggy back pocket, or don't put it in your front pocket, or have an understanding of where it is. Make sure you don't get yourself in any crazy situations you can't handle, and try not to travel anywhere alone. And to some people, that's common sense. But to an 18 or a 19-year-old guy who's going to Vegas for the first time, these might not be things that he would recognize. But this is basically some of the basic teachings of all Aikido that I know of. Is there's that book, The Dynamic Sphere, that covers a lot of that information about situational awareness. We're not here to fight; we're here to make sure that we can defend ourselves and others. So yeah, that should be incorporated into all Aikido. I know it's incorporated in all Tomiki Aikido people that I know in the Baltimore area, so it should be covered in all.
Nice. Yeah, again, that reminds me of something, and it's kind of an interesting moment for me to reflect about in general, especially with my viewers watching, because a lot of people know me as the person who says the bad things about Aikido, but now since the setup is so well put, I remember a lot of the good things. And one of the good things from Aikido for me was that spatial awareness, that being aware of what's happening around you. And it's funny sometimes to me that when I walk in the street, I don't get easily frustrated, but to some degree, I get frustrated when people, like let's say in the convenience store, people don't see anything. They're just like, they're bumping into stuff, and they don't notice me coming around them. And even my girlfriend, she's a bit clunky sometimes, and she's like, I'm telling her like just be more aware of your surroundings, feel what's happening. And for me, it's just so natural. I always try to see if I step to the right, I always check what's behind me, and I think that comes from Aikido, and that also awareness, seeing like some danger on the far distance, like somebody's suspicious walking on the other end of the street, like all of these things, it seems natural to me. But I think if I wouldn't have done Aikido, I would be probably like a lot of the people that I'm upset about. So would you say that Aikido, in your experience, does Aikido teach that greater awareness as well?
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, that's literally one of the founding understandings of Aikido, is about self-awareness. I teach it simple as, knowing yourself, knowing others, and your surroundings will help to get you home and keep you safe.
Yeah, I think, and again, I appreciate you saying that a lot, because I think that's sometimes in martial arts, it can be anyone, a practitioner or an instructor, that the focus becomes so much on the technique. It's like, oh, if somebody grabs you like this, what do I do then? It's like, well, how did you get into the situation where somebody grabbed you? It's like that's actually the most important part, and then later let's look at the grab. But I find a lot of instructors or students, they're so focused on that specific particular moment, and I think that's kind of losing the point, the essential point of it. So again,
yeah, that reminds me of a quick story. Back in the early days when I started doing Tomiki Aikido, I was working downtown Baltimore, and downtown Baltimore, protecting assets and sales. You have to have conflict with some people, and I did something wrong, and I got hit in the jaw, and I finished the situation correctly, but I got hit before it happened. So, and I go back to my sensei Frank at the time, and I said, Sensei, I was trying to do this, and I got hit in the jaw. And he's like, well, why were you there in the first place? Like, if you knew that there was a possibility of you getting hit in the face, why would you be there? And it was like an epiphany to me, because one of the first rules they teach in Aikido is well, Tomiki Aikido is my eye, proper distance from your attacker.
Mm.
And I allowed him to close distance, talk in my face and all that kind of things. But that quick conversation with him changed my idea of situational awareness. I began to teach and understand my eye at a better understanding. And next time somebody steps towards you, you either take a step back, or you close the distance and deal with what has to happen.
Mm. Yeah,
So
that's
situational awareness is important. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, I just wanted again. I'm a bit of a broken record. I just wanted to say that's some great stuff. I know a lot of people who are watching, and including myself, there's a lot of curiosity about Tomiki Aikido, and by the fact that I never really met properly a person who practiced it for a while, how would you describe the difference between, and I don't know if that's the correct way to say, but let's say like the majority of Aikido versus Tomiki Aikido? Is that a question?
I mean, yes, any question is a question, but me
Yeah.
personally, my personal experience, I find the goals of Aikido to all be the same.
Mm.
As meaning the end game, it's more of the path that your individuals choose to get there. And I've done Aikikai in the past, and it seems like, and people always said it was more flowery and more of a dancing art. But like I said, when I worked out with those guys, and I had no prior knowledge or experience of Aikido at all back then, I just saw a beautiful art, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to invest some time into that. I'm
Mm.
not, that kind of guy that, dives into the culture and do all that kind of stuff. I'm more about, I see this as something that I can do that could benefit me, so I'm going to do it. But I don't see any end game difference. It's sort of like religion to me. It all kind of has the same ending. It's just that people have different ways of giving information to their people.
Mm.
So except for the controversy about competitions and all of that political stuff, I think all Aikido is Aikido to me.
Mm. No, you did mention that word, which is unfortunately a lot on my radar, the controversy.
Mm.
Um, and that's we exchanged some emails before, and interesting enough, I never personally put much effort into judging like, oh, this Aikido style is like this and this Aikido style is like that. But I did notice in the Aikido culture that I was surrounded in, there was quite a bit of that. Oh, this style is good, this style is not good. And Tomiki Aikido, a lot of people, they never practice it. As I mentioned, like in my country, there was not even one school of it. But usually there would be this kind of controversial touch to it. Like if somebody would be talking about Tomiki, is like, oh, they do competition. It's like that like it's like a bad thing. Did you ever bump into that kind of perspective?
I never actually personally bumped into it. I've seen those kind of comments online whenever I periodically check,
Mm.
and I never understood it. The way I see that is history. History is usually written by the powerful or the winner. And when
Mm.
Morihei Ueshiba died, there was a fight for history, from what
Mm.
I understand. And history was written where Tomiki was written out of the history. I have
Mm.
no idea why. It's not my culture. But I'm an American. I do what I find that works for me. If it doesn't work for you, I give you all the right to your own space. As long as you stay out
Mm.
of my eye, we're totally fine.
Mm. Yeah, I see. And one of those technical questions. So there's some videos of the Tomiki competition. I think they're not easy to understand. Like what is exactly
Hmm.
happening there? So could you enlighten us? Could you tell us a bit about? Okay, so what do we see there? What's happening there?
Okay, I'm gonna try to give you a broad understanding, but first remember
Mm.
that yes, I do competition, but I view competition differently than the actual competition rules.
Mm.
But all rules in all martial arts are designed for safety. That's just the number one rule. So Tamiki Aikido competitions is new as far as a martial art competition, and it only takes a couple of people of looking at a rule and then finding a way to circumvent it and cause harm, because Aikido really is working on joint manipulations and things like that. So you
Mm.
can easily be malicious and cause real harm to someone. And when that happens, the boards have to come up with rules to try to make sure that it's safe for all practitioners.
Mm.
So a lot of the stuff you see that you might not agree with is because something has happened and it had to be a change in the rules to make it safer for all practitioners.
Mm. Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, like it answers a big part. I think it explains a lot of things. But also, I guess like maybe it's too complex to answer. But like just
Mm.
like kind of like for let's say a beginner comes to a class of yours and they're interested. Okay, so how does this competition work? Like just in a technical way. What are you aiming for, or like what a general competitor? What are they looking for in that match?
Um, Let me answer this first.
Yeah.
First, if a beginner comes to class, competition is probably never the first thing you want to talk about. Because
Mm,
my first question, if you ask me about competition, is, well, are you interested in fighting? Because if you are, Aikido is just not going to be, you're just going to be frustrated. You're going to be angry. It's just not going to work out for you because Aikido is about reacting to action, not causing action. So if you're a fighter and you want to go out and attack people or portray your life in that way, Aikido is not going to work for you as well as if you are
mm,
a calm and a soft person and energy is coming towards you. It's a lot easier to redirect it than to create that energy, especially if you're a smaller person like myself. But in general, if someone were to ask me about competition, I would say if you take these basic techniques we're going to teach you, competition is where you want to practice that to see if what you're doing will actually work in a non-scriptive way.
mm,
That's the way we do competition. Even in class, when we do knife randori, our rules are a little different than competition rules.
mm,
But it's all about understanding yourself. And if this was a real knife or a real scenario, what could you have done better? What could you have done differently? And were you able to complete your technique within the time frame and get to a safe distance?
mm. Now, naturally, a question comes from me, and as I promised you that I'll do my best not to be controversial, but and hopefully this won't be a controversial. But if
No,
it's
no,
like
no.
if it's one of those where you like don't want to comment about it, just let me know and I'll skip it.
I will
Um,
let you know.
okay, thank you. So most of Aikido does not have that element because
Mhm.
when you explained how you train that, and again I think just competition just is not the right word here, but the word that comes
Mhm.
from me is pressure testing, or the phrase, which is
Right, right.
a phrase which I love, and just to hear Aikido having that pressure testing element where it's like, okay, here we do the katas, here we do the technique, the cooperative techniques, and now we put it to test and see what works, what doesn't work. Like that's like makes my heart sing. That's like the element which I was missing in Aikido myself. um
Mm.
what's your personal take about that? So I'll call it pressure testing. So that pressure testing element is not in a lot of Aikido schools. What are your thoughts about that?
One of the things that I tell everyone is that you should, I'm going to use the term you use, pressure test your understanding of any martial art.
Mm,
Aikido is can be done in a way that is very brutal and very dangerous. So if you can't practice that in a real world scenario, but you can take a kata and say, if this happens, I'm going to respond in this way, and then
mm,
practice that in an unscripted way. So pressure testing is a, I don't know who came up with that term a few years ago, but I think that is a great definition of
mm,
Tomiki Aikido, because Aikido, the way it taught to me was theories of combat. It wasn't actual combat. It was a theory of what would happen. And then Tomiki
mm,
to me is a way of practicing those theories. Yes, you have people that get into competitions. They want to learn rules and learn how to circumvent rules and all that kind of things. But you have, bad apples or good apples, depending on how you're looking at it, in every bunch. But for me and what we do here in Baltimore, it's about having a greater understanding of how you are, who you are, and what you're going to do if this scenario comes up.
mm. I guess in a way to really keep it about your own personal experience and your own kind of personal circle of people, if you were hypothetically speaking, if you were to remove that pressure testing element, do you think that would hurt the practice that you do, or yeah? Mm,
Absolutely. I mean, see, people get in. I don't know if you ever actually been into a fight or something like that, but
more or less.
there's a certain part of your heart that you have to, because you could practice fighting all your life, but when someone punches you in the face, I tell my students, Aikido will run away and leave you in the fight if you don't train it to be in the fight. So
Mm,
you have to pressure test yourself to know that when the situation happens, me, my mind, my body, my soul, my Aikido, we're all going to be in this together, and we're going to get all of us home at the same time. So and if you don't practice that, you have no way of knowing exactly how you're going to respond when that situation happens. Nothing against any
Mm.
other art that doesn't believe in pressure testing, as let's use that term.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not going to build a race car and then say it can run 7 seconds down the track and never put it down the track. I mean, that's to me, that's a show car. I don't do show anything. If I'm going to do it, it's going to be for a purpose.
Yeah. Again, that I really agree with that, and I think that was the difficulty for me, and I think it's one of the reasons why I speak against the way I was taught and I was
Mm,
training Aikido, is that there was no pressure testing, and when I got into serious trouble or potential trouble, I would freak out. I would not know what to do. I
right.
was not right. It was just like I'm yeah, in a way I'm like the perfect example of the opposite of that, because I was just in a mode of panic. It was too much pressure. I didn't know what's happening, and I would feel lost. And then when I started doing martial arts where pressure testing is included, I got used to that pressure, and now if somebody would come to me in the even like the street, and they would tell me, whatever, like verbal attack, and they would pose
Right.
danger, I would be. I think it's every time there's a danger, it's really important to be super aware and to understand that we never know. Maybe they have a knife, maybe they have friends, like all of these things. But I would have much more confidence than beforehand, where I'm like, I'm dealing with pressure all the time. It's like if he's gonna offer pressure, whether that's a push, a strike, or whatever, it's like
Mhm.
I can work with it. Versus in the past, I was like,
Exactly.
I have no clue what to do here. Mm,
Exactly. And then one of the misconceptions is that when you decide to do Randori, that it's like a free for all and everybody's just trying to kill each other.
mm,
But we do something which is called slow Randori, and you start out
mm,
at a pace that is comfortable for everyone. So, and the person that is not receiving the techniques, the person without the Tanto, is in control of the speed. So if the person stabs him like 7 times in a row, he can easily say, hey, okay, that's really good. Can you slow down a little bit? I'm working on
mm,
something. So it's about, it's not about, taking that 7 second car and going out there and try to run 5 seconds, and crash it into the rails. It's about, slow passes first, understand what you're doing, do some tweaks here and there, and then building up to a pace where you think you can perform at a good pace
mhm.
and still do no damage to yourself or others.
Yeah, yeah. I'm again very much on the same page here, and that reminds me of some of the things I picked up from my friend who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach. You could say also
Mm,
self-defense, but he is the advocate of what he calls aliveness. That in martial arts, basically the pressure testing element. But a lot of times people mistake aliveness for kind of a full-on fight, which is not really the case. And I think again, like the way they train, and it's my favorite place to train in the world. Your partner offers you as much pressure as you can handle, like so that you would fail
right.
but you would succeed as well, like there would be a balance. And I think some schools where there's pressure testing, they push things too far, and somebody keeps destroying a new person, and the new person doesn't really learn anything besides surviving,
Right.
and that's like that doesn't really take anywhere far. So
Right.
so is that do you apply, it sounds like you applied a similar type of methodology as well,
Absolutely.
just yeah, I
Absolutely.
love it.
You got to start off at a level that is comfortable for you. Now, eventually, we want to push you a little bit out of your comfort zone, and then when that gets comfortable, a little bit more. And the way Aikido is designed, you never ever want to be doing your Aikido at full speed or breakneck, because it is, a Budo and it's designed to survive. So it's not ever meant for that in your pressure testing, but you definitely want to go at a pace that is, let's just say, realistic in some way.
Mm. Um, Another big question on my mind, and I think we kind of naturally discussed about something similar. That
Mm,
the way I was introduced to Aikido, and I think that's a kind of a common floating idea that Aikido, that Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, sensei, he was against competition, and thus nobody competes. And I think that's one of the reasons why Tomiki has a controversial kind of people have a controversial opinion about Tomiki in Aikido, because they're like, oh, well, sensei said not to compete and there's competition. Personally, I don't agree with that. I think
mhm.
people confuse competition with basically essentially pressure testing. I think they put that in the same bucket, and they think like you cannot do any type of a live practice, and I think that's a confusion. So what do you personally think about that whole narrative?
Once again, that goes back to history and how I feel about history. History is written by those who win, and history is very rarely written correctly. But
Mm,
I've read some of that too, and the parts that I read, it was not specifically talking about Aikido competition. It was talking about
mm,
competition in general. And truly, no one can win in competition. We have a lot of road rage incidents and things like that going on right now, and that is competition. Like people are competing over
mm,
space in the road that belongs to no one. Like why is that? Why is that a thing? Like just back off or give him the room to take his space. Yes, he's an asshole, but that's his choice in life, not your own. Because he's an asshole does not mean you have to stoop to his level and be an asshole and compete with him over this
mm,
car length of space. So I view that as that type of competition. If we had a lot less competitions in many things in the world, look at the political crap that's going on in the world and in the U.S. If there was a whole lot less competition, there might be a lot better outcomes with many things. So I view that statement being a very general statement about competition and not specifically
mm,
about competition within Aikido. Because true Aikido, there is no competition. Even in the competition, the guy with the Tanto is trying to score a point without causing damage. And the guy that's
mm,
receiving is trying to not get stabbed and score a point without being damaged. So if everybody is trying to do Aikido and follow the rules and keep everyone safe, it's really not a competitive thing until you allow your ego to get into it. And that's when it's a downfall for all competitors.
right. Yeah, we slightly touched that off record, but again, I'm very much with you on that part. That's in a way like that's where, especially when I started questioning my personal Aikido practice, the one I was exposed to, where there was no pressure testing,
Mm,
and there was that idea that we don't pressure test because Aikido you cannot compete, but the thought that was on my mind is like, well, if we're helping each other and we're giving each other pressure to evolve and to become better, that's like not really competing. That's kind of that's
cooperating.
right. That we're cooperating just in a different way. So
Absolutely.
it's kind of a bit crazy and interesting. Mm,
Yeah, I don't understand how that came to be. Once again, I'm not a history person with Aikido, but yeah, it has something to do with the history books from what I've been told and understand. But you know, competition is something within you. It's not something someone can force you to do, even if they put you in a competent atmosphere. You can choose to take that atmosphere and educate yourself on many things, as opposed to fighting to win a point or win a medal or some insignificant trophy. I take the losing more than the winning, because losing, I learn a fault, and if I can fix that one fault, I know that I can be better at what I'm doing and be better at myself. So I look for the losses. That was also one of Morihei Ueshiba's famous lines. You learn
mm,
more in failure than you do in success.
yeah.
So that's how I look at competition. I go there to look at that. What can I improve, and how can I make my Aikido better?
Yeah, yeah. That reminds me of a funny moment I had in my life, where I came up with this phrase very naturally. It was right after I had like a single MMA fight in a cage. I officially lost. People said I wasn't supposed to. Long story short, but I lost on record.
I know that
And
feeling.
yeah, okay. So, but I accepted it. I didn't contradict it. But then, as I was reflecting about it, I came up with this phrase for myself that I said, "Losing is my superpower," because I went through so many experiences of what some people would call losing, like even my Aikido experience where I got disillusioned. I was promised one thing, it didn't turn out to be what I was promised, and that could be considered like a failure, a loss. And I had a number of these experiences, but that's actually the reason, in a way, to say like that's the reason this channel exists. That's the reason these conversations exist. It showed me so many things,
Success.
and I think now I'm much more aware of what I want and what I don't want because of those failures. And if I would have been quote unquote winning all the time, I probably wouldn't have learned as much as I did right now. Mm.
I would agree.
And I'll open up the live chat for questions. I'll be picking them out there. I'll choose the best ones. They're not going to be random and all over the place. But just a note to the viewers that they can start writing those questions down. But one or two more questions before we get those questions from the audience. I think, in a way, you more or less answered the question which I'm about to ask, but I think it's a very important message. So just want to kind of bring it back. So there's the phrase that you mentioned to me in our email exchanges. I saw it in your bio that when somebody comes to your dojo and it seems like that you like to say to them, if you like to fight, Aikido is not for you. If you want to be able to defend yourself, then Aikido is what you're looking for. So could you expand on that a little bit more so that everybody gets to know what you mean?
Yes, it's there are certain types of people in the world. You know, there are some people that are A-type people. They're aggressive. They want to attack. Like they see a situation and they want to run towards it, kind of thing. If you're that type of person, like you want to be the first one to throw the punch, or you want to cause the reaction, then Aikido is going to be a struggle for you, because Aikido is about redirecting energy. So if you're giving energy, you can't redirect it at the same time. So and that's literally what it comes down to is what kind of personality do you have? Everybody looks at arts for different reasons, and I believe, like, you don't pick an art. An art kind of exposes itself to you because it should represent your personality and who you are or who you want to be. So and I have people that are fighters that really enjoy Aikido, but in theory, if your true goal is to fight and you like fighting, you like that feeling of the testosterone growing and all that kind of stuff. Number one, in the beginning of the fight, things are not going to work out well because you're going to have to be attacking. And then most Aikido fights are over in 4 to 5 seconds. They're not fights. They're eliminating threats and making yourself home. So if you're eliminating an attack within 4 or 5 seconds, that feeling of success is not there. After a fight, you're all bloody and they're all bloody and you're huffing and puffing and you're like, I won. But in an Aikido fight, they come at with you, you do a technique, they're on the ground and you're going to your car. That feeling is not there. So you're not gonna like that feeling. You're gonna be like, man, I should have did more, or I should have, which we all go through that. I went through that when I was younger. Like, I want to do more, I want to feel this success. But that's not what Aikido is about. Aikido is about success, not about feeling the success.
Right. Yeah, again, it makes so much sense, and I think where I relate to that, to your message that you just shared, is that people confuse fighting with self-defense. It's a thing I like to say quite a bit. Like, people think that I think one of the writers of a well-known self-defense book called it the monkey dance, is where two guys, like alpha males, they get into a fight. They're like, oh, let's take this outside. Let's see who's better. Like that. Okay, that's a fight, and they're both responsible for getting into that. But that's not self-defense, because you kind of that person provoked it himself. But like a real self-defense situation probably actually lasts as long as those Aikido moments that you described, like 3 to 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. Somebody gets knocked down, or somebody falls, stumbles, whatever. The other person runs away, and like that sounds much more like self-defense versus, okay, let's square up and for 5 minutes let's exchange strikes. That's not really self-defense.
That's a competition.
Right. So it's interesting. Like that Aikido that you describe is really, it really sounds like what self-defense sounds like. So I appreciate it.
No problem.
One more question there, which whatever you answered already kind of answered it to me, but just to get that final clarification, especially in I'll call it the majority of Aikido, and the way I describe it is like what people see online when they type in Aikido. Usually it's not pressure testing. Usually it's cooperative techniques. And there's right now, I think the conversation online is that Aikido can be useful if somebody has trained other practices before. And there's some number, because I'm active in the online community, I see those examples. I promoted some of them myself. There are some fighters who have a lot of experience working as bouncers and having MMA fights, etc. And then they go to Aikido and they pick a technique here and this technique and that technique, and they make it work. And so one of those floating theories is that Aikido can work if you trained other martial arts before. Now, from what I hear, the way you describe the Aikido that you teach and you practice, it doesn't sound like that's a necessity to have. Like, you practice other martial arts before you came to Tomiki Aikido, but the way you described your practice, it doesn't sound like somebody needs to practice something else before they come. It seems like it's a pretty wholesome type of system.
Yes, if you're talking about defending self. Once again, this comes into the what kind of person are you internally. If you are a quiet person and you keep to yourself, and you're not out there trying to attack others, then you're in a position to defend yourself. That is someone attacking you, and that's what Aikido is 100% designed for. But if you are a bouncer or something like that, that's a different thing. That's a different role where you have to insert yourself into a situation. So yes, you will need other training. So you got to decide who you are, what you want to do with what you have. I mean, if your lifestyle, I have many students that are, doctors, psychologists. These people aren't fighters. But my sensei, Frank Ferris, is a child psychologist lawyer. So he's sometimes in a situation where he's in a room with someone that could be potentially dangerous. Does that ever happen? No, but he knows that he needs to be able to protect himself if that person decides they wish to attack him. And there's a difference between beating someone else up and defending yourself from them and subduing them and having a conversation with them and educating them. So if you're in that type of life where you don't have to actually attack others, Aikido is 100% viable as a self-defense. But if you're that type of person that gets into fights at stoplights and all that kind of stuff, then no, Aikido would not be the only thing you would need, because now you're in that mano-a-mano fight thing where you're all squared off at a stoplight, and and once you square off, it's no longer Aikido, it's a fight. Aikido is about defending yourself. So fighting is not Aikido. It's not the same thing in my view.
Yeah. Again, it makes my heart sing from hearing what you say, and it reminds me of this conversation I had with a friend of mine, Christopher Hine. He's the guy I mentioned like 20 years ago, started questioning his Aikido practice and got into a lot of trouble with people who started hating him. But now the way he describes the Aikido that he teaches, one of the key principles that I like is that he makes it very clear that Aikido is not everything. And personally, I especially in this conversation, I avoid to say anything bad about the general Aikido that I see, but I do find that sometimes the most Aikido that I bump into, I find that there's a bit of a challenge that it promotes itself as everything. It's like, oh, we teach knife defense and we teach sword defense and we have staffs and you will deal with MMA fighters and you will deal with boxers. It's like it's a bit too much. It's like also we're philosophy and there's so many things that it kind of presents itself as, or the schools that I met, including my own that I passed, like, okay, you will learn this and you will be able to deal with everything, which is almost too far and unrealistic on its own. Like as we started the conversation and there was that example of you come to boxing and that's what to expect. You're going to get striking. You're not going to learn wrestling or anything. But there are, and it's not only Aikido. I think some martial arts or some martial arts schools, they have that same challenge of promoting themselves as the solution to everything. But it's really enjoyable for me to hear that that's not the way you go. You have a clear definition. Okay, this is what Aikido is. This is what Aikido is not, and this is where it starts and this is where it ends. So I really like that approach.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I even my students, I tell them, like, if you want to find out about boxing, go do boxing. You want to find out about MMA, go, because at my dojo they teach many styles and many arts, luckily. So, and I encourage them all. I mean, learn them all. You want to learn how to strike, this is the guy you want to talk to. He will teach you how to properly punch, because it becomes a tool bag. For me, Aikido is just what I call what I do. Except when I'm in a competition, I always hear, well, that's not Aikido. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm walking away. So I'm successful in my eyes. And that's why I'm here. So you have to figure out who you are and what you're trying to accomplish, and then go find the tools to put in your tool bag to accomplish your goals. I mean, if someone ever tells you that you should not be doing this, or they're all for everything, and you find that there's a hole in that and you question that and they tell you, don't worry about that. I mean, that should give you some information right there.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I was not wise enough to pick that up, but I eventually did. So, but yeah, that's a good point.
Hopefully, how is your Aikido journey going on right now? Are you still doing Aikido? Have you?
Good question. So I started dabbling with Aikido techniques in my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training. So in my grappling, stand-up grappling, or rolling on the ground, I started to see like, okay, it's maybe a
Kotegaeshi will always be there. Yeah.
Right. And so some techniques come up, but at the same time, I question whether that's like really Aikido, because these are techniques. The greater question is, You feel like it seems like you have something to say about that.
Because I go through this in my dojo. Like we'll do kata, and kata is very specific, and you do this and you do that. And then when we do live sparring, they'll say, "Well, I put him down, but it didn't look like Aikido." The goal is to get home. It's not what it looks like. And if you're in a
Right.
situation, I mean, you don't, if you recognize what you're doing, then it's not Aikido. Aikido is about training and then letting your body do what it needs to do to get you to a safe environment. As long as
Mm,
you can keep your mind, your body, and your soul focused on your safety, Aikido will show up if you train the katas properly and do your drills properly. And then Aikido will generally get you to a safe position.
yeah, yeah, and kind of falling from that, I think when I think about, okay, am I still practicing Aikido? Like going on the mat,
Mm.
it's been a while. I do want to try out Tomiki Aikido, and unfortunately, as I said, it's not in my country, but I plan to make a trip to England just for that, and to see how it goes. So I'm really eager to have that direct experience. But like the Aikido that I did before, haven't done it for a while. I do admit that I'm a bit in a relationship with it, like and some people compare it to like an ex-girlfriend, like,
I knew.
oh, I don't want to be in the same room with her. So that's a little bit how I feel, and it's my, my experience. But at the same time, I see good things. Like I see things that, like the way I talk to people, the way I look at conflict, the way I learn. Like I see the Aikido spirit is in me, and
Mm.
I was resistant to admit that before, but the longer the more time passes, the more I notice, okay, there's Aikido still in me. You were about to say
May
something,
I
I think.
may I
Yeah, go ahead.
ask what style of Aikido you took? I don't
Yeah,
research your history. So what style
yeah.
of Aikido did you take?
I started essentially with Aikikai,
Okay.
and then I moved on to an instructor who was an Iwama guy for many years. He studied directly with Saito, but he also started traveling to various instructors, and he kind of made his own thing. Like it was essentially Aikido with the Iwama roots, but he made it in a way like contemporary with a lot of like self-expression and so on. So it's almost hard to explain, but the thing is, so there was some good Aikido there, but also his own take, which I think there were good things in that and bad things in that. So I got both of it. But let's say I started with Aikikai, got some Iwama training, and got some hippie Aikido.
Okay, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
and do you feel it was more spiritually based or physically based?
It was more spiritually based, which I think
Mm.
was where I think that was the promotion of it, like, oh, this is
Mhm.
more spiritual. And but the thing is, at the same time, I was looking back, I'm a bit upset about it because I was also told that it's self-defense, and like that was the thing which I was pointing to, is like it was trying to sell itself as everything, like we're spiritual,
Right.
but also you would be able to deal with an MMA fighter. And it's like I would have appreciated it much more if things were more down to earth. There was like the spirituality would be there, the philosophy would be there, but that would be an add-on to this thing that we do, versus, oh, we're all enlightened and this is amazing, and also you'll be able somehow to manage yourself in the fight. So that's my unfortunate experience, but I learned a lot from it.
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did.
uh is it okay if I bring up a couple of questions from the audience right now?
Absolutely.
Cool. So the way I'll do it, I choose them. I avoid questions which are not worth attention. I hope,
Understandable.
right. I try not to avoid many, but I'll bring them out on the screen and I'll read them out loud. So you'll see them in a moment. And okay, so I'm about to find one. Okay, so let's look at this one. So Lauren Smith is asking, what do you think the spiritual aspect of Aikido is important or not? Okay, I think there's a bit of a grammar
I
mistake there,
can't
but
see it. Sorry.
okay, I'll read it for you. So do you think the spiritual aspect of Aikido is important, or is Aikido entirely a set of technical skills?
Um, Okay, so I believe that it is extremely important because if you don't work on your own self and understand who you are, it's going to determine how you enter situations. Once again, as I say, Aikido is about defending self. So if you're constantly putting yourself in bad situations, Aikido is going to get overwhelmed and you're going to get destroyed by one or multiple attackers. But if you take the spiritual aspect of Aikido about protecting self, protecting others, knowing your surroundings, being kind to others, I tell my students, if it's going to cost you 1% to not fight, what is 1%? I mean, it's absolutely nothing. So, taking the 49% and walking home is just as good. And that is something that Aikido teaches you is like not every fight is meant to be fought, physically
Mm.
anyway. So the spiritual aspect is extremely important in any martial art. All martial arts have some understanding of self and what you should and shouldn't be doing. So if you're taking a art without a spiritual side to it, that's just learning how to street fight. I mean, and that's not the best way to evolve as a human.
Mm. Different question from Simon Edwards. Do you think Randori really benefits beginners, or should it be for higher grades?
Depending on what you're considering to be Randori, I believe in Randori practice should not be practiced until you get to a certain level. Usually for us, it's around green belt, where it's usually about a year or so because you have a general understanding of yourself, you understand the footwork, you understand the movements, and that's when you start to begin Randori. Now, as far as slow Randori could be practiced within the first couple of months because it teaches you to understand the flow of energy from one person to the next as it transitions into techniques. But actual competition, we have competition which there's white belts and yellow belts and everybody that does it. But those are more because when they're doing them at that level, there's giggling and there's laughing, and it's more of fun and experiencing the actual
Mm.
thing, as opposed as to the bloody knuckles and trying to kill each other things that you would expect to see in competition.
Mm.
Hope I answered that question.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. So Christian is asking, could you explain the scoring and win conditions of Toshu and other kind of Shiai? Since he comments, since there doesn't seem to be an explanation on YouTube. You don't need to make it a big long answer, but I don't know. Is it possible to say a few words about scoring and win conditions of Toshu?
Toshu is a little different than knife randori. Toshu is the open hand competition. It's still working through the phases of learning and trying to understand how it can be incorporated into an actual competitive thing. But it's sort of like if you can simulate a punch, which would be touching someone on the face and applying pressure for off balancing. It is a point given. Usually it's a yuko, which means off balance. So if you off balance someone to the point, you get a point for it. If you gain control over someone and you take that off balance and you control their body, or they put a hand on the floor, that is a wazai, which means that you get good points for it. And if you completely throw someone and they just land flat on their back or land on the ground and you maintain good aikido posture, then that is the ippon or a full point. But that's the general rules of Toshu. And with all competition, judging, one of the comments that I'm known for is that judges have unique vision. It comes down to what the judges see and how they think it should be scored. But yeah,
Mm.
Toshu scoring is extremely difficult.
Mm. Yeah, but when you said that, I immediately thought about the popular mixed martial arts, and so many times it's like, oh, the scoring was wrong, and it's like, and even one of the, like, I had a chance to lucky chance to train with one of the top coaches, and he would say to his fighters, don't leave it to the judges because luckily
Right.
in MMA you can submit someone, but I guess in Tomiki you can't.
In Tamiki, you can't do that. Yeah, it has to be left to the judges because there's a thing out there. If you do a technique too quickly or too aggressively, literally they determine you to be unsafe and you get a penalty for that. And that's a huge
Oh.
penalty because the number one rule is safety,
Hmm.
for all competitors. So it's a very fine line, and Toshu is the harder of the two competitive styles that we do. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's a lot of things that are involved in judging these competitions.
That's interesting. I like it that there's that aspect of if it's too aggressive, too dangerous, that it kind of makes sense to score penalties for that in the Aikido sense. So I like hearing
In the
about that.
Aikido world, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
So I'll bring up this question, which I was thinking, like, is it really worth bringing up? But I think a lot of people have this on their mind, and I'll make a quick comment about it right before I ask you that question. So I'll first read it. So Marcos is saying, have you used Aikido in real situation? If so, how it happened and how it turned out? I'm pretty sure a lot of your students would ask you that same question. Does this happen? It's like,
Mhm.
oh, Sensei, did you use your Aikido in the street? The reason I thought I said I want to say it. Oh shoot, we lost Will. Okay, okay. Hopefully, Will be back with us. But I'll just elaborate on my thought while he's away. Uh, okay, he's getting there back. So I'll elaborate to you, and if Will comes back, I'll elaborate to him as well. I think it became very clear from what Will said was that the way he described Aikido, Will's Aikido is not only about kotegaeshi or nikyo. It's all about the self awareness, the avoiding the situations, the basically avoiding the fight, and getting back home safe. So if that's the goal, and if that's the definition of the way he defines Aikido, I know it may sound like a bit of a scapegoat to some, but I honestly feel that way. That's Aikido. That's the way he describes Aikido. Then he's successful. If every time he avoided a fight, he's successful. And I know that everyone has that idea of, oh, did you use the kotegaeshi in the street? But since Will is very clear on what Aikido is for him and what Aikido is not for him, I'm sure he would have said, yes, I did all the time. I used it all the time, and it's not about the techniques. Anyway, I hope you got my point. I really hope he's gonna come back. There's so many good questions that he could answer, and so many good answers that he's giving. So hopefully, let's see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I see something. Some tech issues?
I assume so. It just all of a sudden said I was backstage, so I don't I don't know what happened.
Okay, first time that happened. Very happy you're back. Unfortunately, I'll repeat myself because since you came back. So that question, I was saying to everyone that the way you described Aikido, what Aikido is for you, since it's going back home safe essentially and avoiding a fight, technically that naturally says you're using Aikido all the time and you're using it successfully. But people are
Right.
always about that. Okay, did you do like a kotegaeshi on the street? And I think that's besides the point. And I just wanted to kind of put it out there. But I don't know what's your answer in that situation?
The simple question, I mean, simple answer to that is yes, more times than I can imagine in any aspect you could possibly imagine. And I have students that tell, stories better than I do about things they've seen happen and all that kind of stuff. But my full-time job is I am a manager of stores, of retail stores, and I've done sales and asset protection and all that kind of things. So, and loss prevention. So that put me into situations where I would have to use my Aikido to apprehend people and explain to them that they're, causing a ruckus and they need to leave and that kind of thing. And one of the things that I liked about doing my Aikido in those type of venues is because nowadays everything is on camera. And the last thing you want to do is on camera and you're like pounding somebody in the head trying to get them to comply. But it takes a quick, simple, control of a joint to educate someone on their mistakes and walking them to the elevator and saying, listen, I'm taking you to this elevator because I'm looking for peace. And if you come back up this elevator, then we're going to have different conversations. And usually with the pain of a really good Aikido technique, it gives them the education that they really want to comply. So, and that's what Aikido has done for me. But yeah, I can't count the number of times that I've done. It was one point I was working in this mall, and they had a no hands-on policy. And anytime they had an issue, they would call me and my staff. We would have to come over and unofficially, of course, and deal with a lot of scenarios back then because that's just what we did. It wasn't about the fight. It was you were going to comply and these handcuffs were going to go on you and there was really nothing you're going to do about it. One of my students who was doing loss prevention at the time always tells this story. He would walk up to suspects and be like, here's some handcuffs. It's really going to be better for you just to put them on. It's going to be a lot less pain for you and you just want to comply. But the true Aikido is about trying to not get into those scenarios. Those were all work related scenarios. So I was forced into those scenarios. But on the streets, people coming at me, that kind of thing, it very rarely happens because you will recognize it in advance. In Baltimore, I just want this little story, but
Yeah.
there was this thing back in the day where people would just walk down the street and they would just randomly punch people in the face. It was the weirdest thing ever. It was going on for
Mm.
about a year. And it was to the point where if somebody's walking towards you, if and you couldn't alter sides, if you kept eye contact with them and you were always ready for that kind of attack, it would never happen because they were only trying to capitalize on people that wasn't aware of their surroundings.
Mm.
So just true understanding of self, others, and surroundings really protects you from having to use it in the streets. So you physically use it. I try my best not to. Mentally, every day, everywhere I go is what I do.
Yeah, it's really great to hear that you had all that experience. I'm sure again people are so that's what they want to hear, and I think that sometimes is besides the point. But it's cool to hear that that it happened. So one more question. Well, again, I find it funny reading those questions sometimes, but it says, "Will, I like your fights. When is your next one?" And my question is like, well, is it a fight really? But then there's the aspect. What strategy you use? What are the rules? And do you think pins should be included in Toshu Randori? So I think it's a long question, but oh, did I? Can you hear me? Will?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, I hear you. Yeah.
okay. I froze. My camera froze, but I'll just get this question out. So I think the best
Okay.
part of this question is, what strategy do you use in competition?
It's funny because my strategy in competition is no different than my strategy in life, and I'm trying to avoid the fight. And it's funny because the judges hate it when I do it because they're looking to promote conflict, and I am literally standing there with my hands up or my hands down, and I'm trying to avoid the conflict at all costs. And then as they're entering to perform, whether it's their strike or their grab or whatever they're trying to do, is when I implement my Aikido. So my strategy is to maintain my eye. That's my whole strategy, is to maintain proper distance. And then once they cross that my eye, I decide if I'm going to retreat or advance and educate them in Aikido.
Nice. Okay.
I hope
How
that
about?
answers the question.
Yeah, I think I liked it.
Okay.
Okay, one more from the same person. What is the superior position in Aikido in relationship to opponent back dead angle? What's your favorite Aikido technique? Okay, there's a lot of questions there. How would you design rule set? Okay, let's make it simple. What's your favorite Aikido technique? Is there one?
The one that works. That's my favorite technique.
I like that
In
answer.
competition, over the last few years, I've been working on sensen no sen, which is trying to understand what they're going to do before they do it, and then initiate the attack. That's what I've been working on the last couple of years. Before that, Gaidon, which is a lower body attack, was one of my favorites. I had a habit of like just walking through people, and they had no idea what happened or how they ended up on the ground. That was one of my favorites. In the beginning of my career, Showman #1 was my favorite technique, but I found that I got too many penalties because it was considered a brutal technique. So I had to get away from that. But basically, it's whatever technique happens. When I do Aikido, I don't really plan on doing a technique. I plan on surviving the situation and getting back to my eye as quickly as possible, and then some kind of Aikido crap happens in the middle. So I mean, that's pretty much what I do in my competitions.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add and say that I really like that approach. That I think we definitely spoke about that off record. I don't know if we spoke much about that on record, but you kind of mentioned it right now. That for you the competition is not there to compete, but it's more to really practice what Aikido is for you. And I think it's such a great point that it's not about, okay, how do I go around the rules and win the match, but it's more about like, okay, how do I just benefit from this experience and sharpen my techniques and my understanding. So I love it.
Yeah,
Eric is asked.
self-improvement.
Eric is saying, earlier you mentioned ma'ai, which is translated as distance harmony. How would you describe ma'ai, and what is its importance to Aiki?
My eye is literally proper distance. It's roughly about 2 arm lengths is where we teach it to the beginners. But it varies for you. Like, there's boxers that want to fight at this distance. There's judo guys that want to fight at this distance. There's karate guys that want to fight at leg distance. Each of those could be considered my eye for that proper art. Aikido art, my eye is right at that, position where they can't punch you, they can't kick you without advancing towards you. And as they advance towards you, what you're looking to do is off balance them as they enter, or you retreat to my eye once again. And is my eye important? I think that was your question. My eye is important in any self-defense art. It's just you have to establish and control my eye. He who controls my eye controls the conflict. That's just a rule of any war or any conflict.
Okay, I'm
Did I answer
looking.
that question for you?
Yeah, I think you're putting out great answers. I'm just hunting for questions. Trying to get a good one out there. Okay, I guess I don't know if this one makes sense, but it may have potential. So why does Tomiki have kata, whereas the other schools don't? And so first of all, is that true?
I don't think that's true. I think all Aikido has kata, as far as I know. That's pretty general. So I'm not sure about that question.
Okay. Yeah, I was doubtful about that as well. I try to avoid questions actually which are statements. Okay, so the other one, how much emphasis is put on the philosophy aspect of Tomiki Shodokan? Like I guess the question is...
It depends on the dojo. Yeah, no. Go ahead if you want to clarify.
Yeah, no, I there's a bit of a lag. My Wi-Fi, I guess, is lagging, so just ignore me. So how much emphasis is put on the philosophy in Tomiki Aikido?
Once again, I think it depends on each individual dojo, individual teachers. As far as I know, everyone follows all the philosophies. We're looking to make ourselves better people. Once again, it's about peace and harmony with yourself, surrounding, and others. So I have never met anyone that did not focus on the philosophies. Now, there is some schools all over the world that focus specifically on the competition aspect of it. But they all seem to have the general understanding and philosophies of peace and harmony as well. So it's all tied in there together. You can't have Budo without understanding, self and the philosophies of peace and harmony.
And another one, do you think martial arts schools should do threat awareness training so students do not get into real fights?
Absolutely. Yes, without question, without doubt. You should be trained how to understand your situation. The thing about fights is that most fights are how do I put this? A choice by two people. Like you said, hey, we're going to go outside and we're going to fight. Well, that's a choice. You both have decided to go outside and fight. To me, that is not, a conflict. It's something you decided to do. One of the things that I always, because I get this from my students, and I compare it to is back in the day, there were gladiators. They were trained to go into a ring and fight and beat each other up and die if necessary, but they were more there for entertainment. And then you had your warriors who were sent out when there was actual war and they had to fight within war. They were two different systems of understanding conflict. So, should schools have threat awareness? Absolutely, because you need to understand, does this person really want to fight with me? Or does he want to walk me outside where his friend can bust me in the head with a pipe? I mean, you just have to understand your awareness.
There's one sponsored question I always like to say thank you very much for the sponsored question. And the question itself is, to what extent do you see the Tanto as knife rather than a point scoring tool to teach principles? Is there a fine line to distinguish?
It depends on how we're looking at it. If you're talking about competition, there are people that don't see the Tanto as a knife. We train with it as what it represents. So the knife must be respected at all times. So if someone swings a knife at you and it touches you on your arm, it's something that we have a conversation about. If you're not, controlling the knife hand and you're focusing on the offhand, we have conversations about, well, yes, you might have did this technique, but the knife was available and you would have still been on your way to the hospital because you made a bad decision at that time. So it's all in the training of the school and how they want to teach you to see your Aikido. We train in Aikido, once again, to make it home from real world scenarios, not for the competition side of it. So it depends on the schools that you choose.
Nice. And one more, this is, I think, a difficult one, but a good one. So if your Aikido is to avoid fights, what happens when you can't avoid fights? For example, someone attacks your kid, wife, etc.
then you need to do your Aikido without hesitation. I mean, the thing about Aikido is not about avoiding fights totally. It's about understanding the conflict before it happens. I think of Aikido as a chess match. It's not checkers. It's not you see an opportunity and you take advantage of it. If my wife, my queen is there, then I have my bishop, my rook, my knight, and a whole bunch of pawns to help me to defend it. And my wife knows this. If she sees something, she knows where she needs to be, how she needs to be, and she knows what's going to happen, sometimes before I do. So it's not recognize the situation late. It's about recognizing the situation as early as possible and making sure that if you have those assets with you, those assets are put into a protective state and you put yourself between whatever that attacker is and those assets that you need to protect. And, and then you got to hopefully your Aikido will stand up and get you home. My battery's about to die on my phone, so I got 20%. That just came up.
Okay, so
I
a
hope that
couple more
answered that question.
questions.
Yeah.
Your answer, I think your answers are great. So 5 more minutes, probably that'll last. I'm having lags myself too, but so couple more questions. So one of them is, do you think an MMA fighter would get any benefits from learning Tomiki from a technical perspective? What it would add to the toolbox?
Yes, actually, at my dojo, I teach a few of the MMA fighters, specifically the knife portion of it. It's funny because when I first got there, they were having some kind of competition, and one of the jujitsu guys came to me and says, "Hey, you want to try that knife against this guy who's a Krav Maga guy or something like that?" And without hesitation, the Randori stuff came out, and he's stabbed up in it, and I'm across the room, and they don't understand what happened. So because they're looking to fight, which is different than understanding about protecting self. And then when you see that opportunity, you capitalize on it. And the my eye between jujitsu and Aikido is not the same. So we're I don't want to say implementing, but Tomiki, we're trying to maintain my eye, and then as they enter, we're trying to go past my eye and immediately get to a position of a wrist lock or an arm bar or something like that. Now, once the guys got a hold of me, then it was different. We were on the ground, but I had the knife in my hand, so there's a knife in their kidneys. So they have to have a better understanding of between competition and real self-defense techniques. So I believe anyone can benefit from learning and practicing Tomiki Aikido, because one of the things I tell my jujitsu guys is, you can travel anywhere, and 4 out of 5 guys or 4 out of 10 guys you meet are going to have some kind of edged weapon with them. It's just a natural thing of life. So, and if you decide that it's not going to be a fight, which means you both decide you want to fight, now you're in a situation where you need to defend yourself. And I don't know if your MMA would or your jiu-jitsu would hold out as well against someone with an edged weapon, unless you've actually specifically trained for that.
Yeah, I actually agree. And one more sponsored question. For which I thank as always, are you familiar with Sensei John Goss Jr.? He has a dojo in Bel Air. Have you trained with him? What do you think of his Aikido style, Korindo Aikido?
I met him 20 something years ago. I never officially trained with him, but he didn't do any of the Tomiki stuff. So it was a lot of theories and understandings without pressure testing, if I could say that. But from what I understand, he was really good at what he did. He had a really good following, but I've never specifically trained with him other than a couple meetings throughout the area.
And oh, I don't think this one is the right one, but it just came up for me. So do you have a favorite YouTube martial arts channel? There's a couple they're naming. It's Hard to Hurt, Sensei Seth. But essentially, the real question is, do you watch YouTube?
I do not. It's funny, but I am truly an Aikidoka. I am as lazy as you could ever imagine. so, so when I am not doing or training Aikido, my students send me stuff if they find something really nice. They send it like, "Hey, you got to check this out," or "What would you do in this kind of scenario?" But I don't actively seek out fighting, or it's. I'm not a fighter. It's just not something I enjoy. So I don't look for fighting channels or YouTube channels unless it's something funny. Sometimes they send me funny stuff too.
Yeah. And there's one question which a couple of people asked: do you train with swords?
I do only in kata form. With the Tomiki system, did I lose you?
Yeah, no. I just remove
Okay.
myself from it.
Within the Tomiki form, there's sword katas and jo katas and things like that you have to practice and understand. So I do that. I don't do any specific sword training. I like Jo personally because you can't walk around and find a sword laying anywhere, but there's always a broomstick or something you can use as a stick. So I do more Jo work than sword work. But other than the actual katas and practicing those, I don't do any specific sword work.
Well, cool. I want to make sure your phone doesn't die out before we have a chance to finish the talk, and I also want to respect your time and honor your time. But I just wanted to say, first of all, I expected to obviously hear some good stuff, but I didn't expect how many things you'll say where I'll be like, "Oh yeah, 100%." That's so great. So it's really lovely to hear all of that, the perspective and kind of answer so many questions of what Aikido could be or can be. So it's really refreshing for me personally to hear that. There's just one more question on my mind, just like a general question, kind of a fun question, before ending the conversation. So self-defense usually has a lot of myths. Do you have any myths in your mind that, like self-defense myths that you are upset about and you're thinking, oh, people should not be thinking that?
The only one that would come to mind right away is gun disarms and all that kind of stuff. You have to realize if someone gets that close to you with a firearm, they're not really trying to end your life. They either want something from you, want you to go somewhere. They have different ulterior motives. So you might escalate a situation that didn't need to be escalated. So just like anything, if you allow someone to get that close to you, you might as well try to understand the situation before you try to do some snappy technique that could really escalate and end up, either you hurting them or them hurting you severely. So I'm not saying don't practice them if that's your environment, if you're in law enforcement or somewhere where a gun to your head is a possibility. But what I'm saying is that it's unless you're high level and you've already studied and you understand yourself and your others in your environment, that's not something that I believe the majority of the world should be practicing on a day-to-day basis.
Then, yeah.
Nope, that was it. Nope,
okay.
That was it.
So the very, very last question that I like to ask all of my guests, which is like a kind of a tricky question, summary of the whole conversation, like a brief summary.
For me?
Yeah, like whatever you want to take this, like summary of the conversation.
That's a good question. I don't know how I would summarize this because this was your thing. So I'll sum it up this way. If you had no information about Tomiki Aikido, I hope I gave you a good understanding of Tomiki Aikido. Once again, Tomiki Aikido is just what I call the system that I do. If you know me from competition, you know that I am not a competitive kind of guy. I am out there trying to practice and promote what I know and how I do it. If you're looking to get into Tomiki Aikido, first look inward and try to determine the kind of person that you are. And if you decide you're going to take it, understand that this is not something where you're going to get a black belt in 3 years or 2 years or 5 years. This is a journey. This is somewhere that you want to be at 60 years old and 80 years old and still practicing with as much vigor as you had when you were younger. So understand yourself before you decide you want to jump into an art like Tomiki Aikido, because it's not about that quick ending of anything. It's about a journey of understanding self and getting better over time. I hope that sums it up well for you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, again, thank you so much for everything. I think that brought a lot of clarity to a lot of people, including myself. And the very last thing, is it okay if I'll click the end broadcast button, and is it okay if I still stay with you for like just one extra bit?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. When you
cool.
click that button, I'm gonna run and grab my charger so that my phone doesn't
die. Okay, sounds good.
And then I'll come back. But while we're still on the air, you mentioned that you were going to think about studying Tomiki Aikido in Europe. If that's the case, make sure you let me know. I might decide to teach a seminar or show up or something like that, so that I can see your Aikido at hand, and maybe I can help you out and you can help educate me as well.
Oh, I'd love that a lot. You'd see my hippie Aikido. But I mean, besides the hippie Aikido, yeah, I'd love it. That'd be great. So please, let's make it happen. That'd be awesome.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Okay,
You're welcome.
I'm clicking the end